We all saw the photo. It's legendary. The massive tubular twister looming in the not too far distance with that man calmly, almost unaware, cutting his grass in the foreground. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in year 2 from the Weather Network in Canada. Yeah, that's right. This is technically episode 367, and we have you to thank for listening and watching. Everyone watched with jaws on the ground at the site of what unfolded in Alberta this day in weather history. It was a hot day in the town of Three Hills, Alberta. That was when the surrounding Nehill County was getting all shaped up for their annual cruise weekend. What they may not have been privy to was the fact that the heat was as intense as it was because it was forced out ahead of a looming cold front, so they were actually in the belly of a warm sector. Warm sectors are a funny thing, aren't they? They fool you into thinking that it is a beautiful day when in fact there is a cold front following in behind that is going to eventually sweep through like some atmospheric pendulum. On this day in weather history, back in 2017, this cold front struck up against that warm continental heat pumped in from the upper plains of the U.S., and the effect was the triggering of a massive tornado that tore through the area just north of town. This is far from unusual on the prairies, but still, it's an emergency all the same. In the end and afterward, Environment Canada would change the EF scale rating, which characterizes the intensity of tornadoes based on the damage they cause, from a preliminary assessment of EF0 to EF1. Why? Judging the extent of the damage and considering other outlying conditions left behind, it was figured that the winds to have done this were not between 90 and 130 kilometers per hour, but rather estimated to have been more likely between 130 to 175. So how does one jump to that conclusion? For winds to be able to pick up and throw an anchored empty grain bin 400 meters, destroy an RV, snap trees, wreck a barn roof, it's probably the telltale indicator of just how powerful the winds would have had to have been. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider. But there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective. But oftentimes, they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. Okay, so before the report of the tossed empty grain bin, there were actually only scattered reports of any damage at all, which made the actual rating hard to nail down from those first estimates. But there were also no injuries reported either, so that was good news. The twister touched down about an hour, 30 minutes northeast of Calgary, about 4:45 p.m., and that was on the ground for 23 minutes, with the communities of Mower and Rowley also in the tornado's path. But the residents of this central Alberta town got a front row seat to what became a spectacular spring tornado with tons of distance and time to capture it on their cell phones. Oh, and capture it they did. There was a vast array of stunning images and videos of the tornado, with many going viral online across Canada and the United States. For historical relevance, the biggest tornado to hit Alberta happened in Edmonton on July 31st of 1987. I actually did an episode of this podcast dedicated to that, so be sure to check that episode out. That tornado was a dangerous and deadly EF4, yet that apparently didn't register with one Mr. Thunis Wessels. You see, he was that man who was caught in that legendary image that we've all seen, mowing his lawn with what looked to be an apocalyptic-sized tornado bearing down on him in the background. Now, if you think that was strange and wild, which it was, check this out. His wife, Cecilia, was woken up that day by their daughter asking, "Where's Dad?" because there's a powerful storm outside. Oh, and by the way, the daughter, she had also just finished watching the movie, The Wizard of Oz. I know, right? I did not make that up. Cecilia saw what was happening behind her totally unaware husband and snapped a picture and then posted it innocently to Facebook. Thought it was cute. Then their lives became a tornado. Within a few days, it was a trending meme, and she had storm chasers, likely gobsmacked and jealous storm chasers, I might add, calling to ask if it was actually real. That then got tweeted everywhere. From there came an interview with a local Edmonton radio station. Then it really spun out of control. Netflix created their own meme out of it, which shined a massive spotlight on it now. So then the production company, 21-inch film company, one of the companies involved in the making of the film Vice, maybe you've seen it, it's about Vice President Dick Cheney, they took note of this and asked permission to use the image in their Hollywood film. Oh yeah, and it was also picked up and published by Time Magazine's online edition. All from that one day in Three Hills, this day in weather history. Tomorrow I revisit a story that plays a big part in my own personal youth. I was, along with hundreds of others, a part of the opening ceremonies for Skydome in Toronto. It's called the Rogers Centre now, but the concept is still the same. Retractable roof that closes to keep the rain out. Except on that biggest of nights where they opened and let all the rain in with paratroopers. True story. Tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.